To be a Formula 1 driver is the dream of any child, and most adults too. Formula 2 is the final hurdle to jump in a driver's race to Formula 1, and with just a few seats being on offer per year, the competition is fierce. Overtaking is a case of pass or be passed, such is the fierceness of the competition, and as a result the championship can provide excitement at tracks where Formula 1 can't. It's recently been announced that the weekend format of F2 and F3 will return to what it was in 2020 for next year, much to the delight of many fans, but Formula 2 still has a big problem. The big problem that F2 currently faces stems from another problem, which is a gremlin that's plagued motorsport since humans first decided that sitting in front of exploding money while travelling at 200 miles an hour was a good idea, and that is of course money. Money makes the world go round, that much is common knowledge, but a young John Warren found out aged 10 that money also stops people from becoming Formula 1 drivers. It's an issue that's inseparable from motorsport, and it's because of the efforts made to combat this issue that we have the problems we currently do in Formula 2. So, what are these problems? An issue that presented itself most noticeably throughout the races in Monza was the enormous gaps between race weekends. Most drivers had not set foot in a racing car in the 2 months between rounds, and this showed when most of the drivers who fought wheel to wheel in the first 2 races of the weekend ended up with damage, or in the gravel. For a championship that is to many of its drivers the final step on the ladder to Formula 1, having a gap between races that's so large that the drivers forget how to race with one another is not a good look. Between Monza and Sochi there will only be a 2-week gap, but even that doesn't make up for the fact there have been just 5 rounds so far in the championship, and that's taken 24 weeks to complete. One race every 4.8 weeks is not enough for a driver to be able to develop their racecraft. As with any skill, it requires regular practice, and it's no wonder some F2 drivers have been racing in other series during their spare time, or else they'd never learn how to race. And this worry doesn't just extend to the drivers, it extends to the teams as well, both Formula 2 and Formula 1. Who could face damage on their cars and have rusty drivers to look after. A driver out of form is no use to any Formula 1 team, so the fact that Formula 2 almost forces its drivers to lose form is a huge worry. If the mistakes made are deemed as driver error, then the drivers might face repair bills of up to €500,000, creating yet another cost that the drivers have to consider. And on the subject of money, a season in Formula 2 costs around $2 million to fund, and while the gaps between races are a cost-cutting measure, it does beg the question as to whether or not the drivers are getting their money's worth if they're unable to truly develop their racing. The good news is that F2 have recently announced they will be fixing the awful calendar for next season, but even so this issue will stay until the end of 2021, and that's not ideal. The second issue is one that's been around Formula 2 for a lot longer than just this year, and that's the reliability of the cars. In 2018, the cars were plagued with clutch issues that caused multiple retirements through no fault of the drivers, and the Mechachrome engine in the back of the Formula 2 car remains to be worryingly unreliable. I mean, look at Yuri Vips, he's had so many retirements this year, and without them he could well have been fighting much closer to the front of the championship. As previously mentioned, this championship's main aims are to provide a way for drivers to perfect their racecraft and do so relatively affordably. If the engines can't be trusted to last more than a few races, then how can this championship consider itself to be good value for money? Drivers should be able to reliably finish every race in the championship if they don't make any mistakes, and every time one of these engines fail, it means another wasted opportunity for its driver. Of course, when an engine is made to achieve the levels of performance the Formula 2 engines do, reliability is always going to be at a premium. But even so, it doesn't represent an equal playing field if luck can significantly dictate how many races you finish. Another issue that needs mentioning while I'm on the subject of a fair championship is the fact that the championship isn't fair. It's common knowledge that every driver has the same sort of car, a Dallara F2 2018 chassis with the exact same specifications as one another. The issue with fairness is therefore not 100% in the machinery, but in the way the championship is run. Formula 2's grid consists of 11 teams, each run by a different set of personnel and each charging their own fees for a season. Since they entered the sport in 2017, Prema have been regarded as the best team to race for in Formula 2. But why? Simply put, the personnel that Prema have running the cars are more talented than the personnel behind, say, the Charouz team. As a result, the cars can be set up better for better cornering performance, top speed, and tyre degradation. As well as this, their factories may have better facilities, so a driver can learn more about the car, and thus this represents an unfair advantage to those who can afford the Prema tax. This problem's affected Formula 2 for a long time now, however, it seems that this year's championship and the gaps between the races that come with it has really shone a light on the differences between the teams. It's been dominated really by just 3 teams, ART, Prema and Carlin, and races won by any other driver have been few and far between. A possible solution to this would be to operate the Formula 2 Championship in the same way the W Series is run, with all the cars being run by the same group of people and the teams just being the liveries on the car. Teams can still make profit off drivers entering the series and the sponsors they bring with them, while the drivers will be able to truly show their talent in a level playing field. Sadly, this solution is easier said than done, but it doesn't mean we can't at least try to improve things, as right now I don't believe Formula 2 is the best possible value for money from a driver's perspective. And I haven't even come to the big problem yet. The problem that I'm talking about relates directly to all I've been saying thus far about the value for money that F2 represents. Just last month there were 9 open seats in Formula 1, and given that 8 of next year's seats are going to be filled by drivers just moving between teams, that leaves just 1 seat remaining for a driver outside of Formula 1. Guan Yu Zhou is currently the favourite to get that seat thanks to a rumoured $30 million investment from his sponsors. Having looked at his junior career, I really don't see him as the ideal candidate for that seat, especially seeing as we have drivers such as Théo Pourchaire and Callum Ilott, who were previously linked to the seat, who are arguably far more talented drivers than Guan Yu Zhou. Cash is obviously very much king in this sport, and therefore it's no surprise that the 2 drivers I've just mentioned are not able to simply buy their way into that seat, but the worry for me is the way that F2 treats talent. Take a look at Nyck de Vries, for example. He won the Formula 2 Championship in 2019, however, going into 2020, there was just 1 seat available to a driver outside of F1, which was filled by Nicholas Latifi thanks to his immense financial backing. Nothing against Nicholas Latifi, but he didn't win the championship. The rules in Formula 2 state that a driver that wins the championship may not race in the series again, and this is for fairness. But it therefore means that if the winning driver does not have a Formula 1 future sorted, then it's possible they might not race in the following year. If they stay a few years out of the sport, then it's entirely likely that the F1 bosses will either lose interest or forget about them entirely, or worse, another driver will come along with strong financial backing, maybe without having won the championship, and they'll get into F1 as a result. That in turn could push another championship winner out of the F1 team's radars, and so the cycle continues. Another issue raised by the case of Nyck de Vries is the ability of F1 teams to accommodate their junior drivers. De Vries had been a member of the McLaren junior team in 2019, as had Lando Norris in 2018. Given that both Norris and his then teammate Carlos Sainz had contracts for 2020, McLaren had no use for Nyck de Vries, so he was allowed to go to Formula E, where he's fortunately found himself a very promising career and has won the championship. Going back to Guan Yu Zhou for a second, he's a member of the Alpine F1 Academy, however, he's not alone in this. In fact, the current championship leader Oscar Piastri is in the same academy, and it's clear to all that Piastri is much more talented than Zhou. And let's say Piastri does go on to win this year's championship. What does he do then? Alpine would surely not want to waste such a talent, but with Esteban Ocon signed onto the team until at least 2024 and Fernando Alonso showing no signs of his age, then what can Alpine realistically do with Piastri? And given that Piastri and Zhou are 2 members of an Alpine academy that has 5 drivers in its ranks, it's not like they're alone in being neglected by their academies. Plus we have the Ferrari, Mercedes, Williams, Sauber and Red Bull academies, all of which are unable to offer their drivers a seat for next year. Even if a driver doesn't win the championship, they can't just stay in the F2 holding pattern forever, as they can't keep spending $2 million per year on a season. It's easy for people like myself to sit at home and claim there is an easy fix to all that I've just mentioned, but the fact is there isn't. An ideal Formula 2 championship relies on Formula 1 to change itself to accommodate Formula 2, which just isn't going to happen. It needs radical change in the F2 championship in the rulebook, and many of the drivers could be lost as a result. But with all that having been said, it needs saying that Formula 2 is one of the most entertaining championships to watch this year, when it is actually on. And my so-called big problem is not something that is the direct fault of anyone working for Formula 2, nor is it even the fault of Formula 2. It just pains me to see some of the talent we're seeing this year in Formula 2, and to know that 21 of those drivers, possibly all 22, will not achieve their dream this year. Maybe they never will. God, that's a bit of a somber way to finish, isn't it? But right now, if you wanted to get into F1 next year, then the best thing you can do for your chances is to be in Formula 2.